Kessel. It's a mining colony, but the Imperials often keep political prisoners here too.
What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is going to be all about the Legends history and breakdown of Kessel. If you saw the canon version, I mentioned how this is one of the most changed with planets in all of Star Wars. I mean, just look at it. The Legends version wouldn't even be called a planet by NASA standards, not having a spherical shape, so it's more of a planetoid or an asteroid. And the history is completely different as well. I'd say it's a lot more crazy and interconnected to the other lore, so let's just jump right into it. Kessel is located at grid coordinates T10, in the Outer Rim territories. It rotates around one sun, named Ceja, and has one moon, which was called the Garrison Moon. A day is 26 hours long and a year is 322 days. And here you can see how that differs from the canon Kessel and other important worlds. Because of this bean shape, there are a couple different numbers for the diameter, being 6,632 kilometers at the narrowest point, and 7,980 kilometers at the widest, which would make it a little more than half the size of Earth, and about 60 times the Death Star 1. Now there was no atmosphere at first, but as factories popped up, the emissions eventually built up a very thin atmosphere that got it a Type 3 ranking, meaning it was still too thin to breathe for most organics. It was also described as being very cold, and as you might expect, the terrain was all just flats, craters, tunnels all throughout the world, and countless rocky mountains. But interestingly, there are some native species: the energy spider, Taras Chai, and bogey. The simplest were those bogies, being about 5 centimeters or about 2 inches, and completely composed of just energy, having no mass and can pass through anything, but drain the power of many electronics. The Celestials, those beings that shaped the galaxy eons before even the most ancient of empires, created an absurdly complex machine under the surface of Kessel, a machine that was sort of an astrological clock, with these bogies somehow being able to collect data from other beings and tech that later arrived on Kessel. Somehow they transmitted that to the Celestials on another plane of existence. So the bogies are like a bridge between realms, but could still be interacted with from beings from our plane, namely the energy spiders. Also known as spice spiders, the glitter stem in their webs would trap the bogies, an interaction that released light and attracted the spiders, who would then consume them as their main food source. There was also the Taras Chai, the small 3-centimeter insects that would often be eaten by the slaves that were forced to work the many spice mines. But this glitter stem material in the spiders' webs was one of the most sought-after drugs in the galaxy. Millennia of these webs being spun in the tunnels on Kessel led to the glitter stem seeping into the dust and rock that comprised this world. And it was the only source of glitter stem in the entire galaxy. But something that's often overlooked is that in Legends, one of the effects of glitter stem is that it gave you telepathic abilities. They only last a short time as the drug quickly wears off, but you really gotta keep in mind what it is that you are consuming. The interdimensional godlike Celestials used the bogies as a sort of light code, downloading information from the species and tech they came across, and somehow passing that information over to Celestials on a different plane. Those bogies are then trapped in the glitter stem, the only material that seems to stop them, and then they're eaten by these spiders that produce even more glitter stem. This drug, or spice, interacts with every sentient species in the galaxy, and then gives them the ability to communicate outside of the normal limits of the closed physical universe. A hallucinogen that was placed here by the gods and that connects you to this separate realm. I think it's safe to say that these Legends lore writers were reading a lot of McKenna or Graham Hancock. Things like psychedelic mushrooms that are literally called the flesh of the gods in certain cultures. So although in canon spice is almost exclusively a negative thing, at least in Legends this glitter stem seems to be a lot like hallucinogens here on Earth. And that similar complexity of being stigmatized and worshipped by certain people seems to have existed in the galaxy far, far away. But in both Legends and canon, the problem is that crime syndicates are able to refine it to be incredibly dangerous and addictive. And there were enormous profits in this, dating back to at least 25,000 BBY, with Zim the Despot taking over Kessel and locking down the spice market. But of course it would be targeted by every crime lord over the millennia. Even the ancient Sith had tombs and ruins here, though the exact reason and purpose for them being on this planetoid is still unknown. The Hutts and Pikes would have the biggest influence in the modern era, setting up many factories and bringing in thousands of slaves. But the Empire eventually locked the planet down for themselves. Early into their rule, they set up at least 3 detention centers, and now any Imperial dissidents could find themselves being worked to death mining the spice, which they would have claimed could have been used for legitimate medicines, but it was rumored to have been used to prop up whatever crime boss the Empire was using at that time. He who controlled the spice controlled the galaxy, in the sense that every criminal warlord was now made or broken by the Emperor. Where crime could flourish and which lords would rule the underworld were in complete control of the Empire, at least in theory, as it was an evil symbiotic relationship which allowed the Empire to justify their infringement on civil liberties. Just as Palpatine controlled both sides of the Clone Wars, the Emperor's war on crime was manipulated similarly, with the ability to make or break criminal empires with the flow of spice. And so Kessel had to be highly regulated, with 700 personnel overseeing 10,400 prisoners, but with the prisoners being ranked and pitted against each other as well. An interesting psychological trick to make ambitious and skilled prisoners feel as if they were in control of something, even with a life sentence on the most infamous rock in the galaxy. Also, that 700 personnel was just the Imperial humans, but a lot of the running of the station was via the Colicoids, a creepy insect species that built a lot of the CIS ships, vehicles, and droids. This was the same species who had cathedral-like shipyards, and thought that design itself was something holy. So I wonder if they felt any reverence in managing an operation that mined the substance that connected the psychic and physical planes, as this Imperial Colicoid alliance is extremely odd. Even before the Battle of Yavin, the Rebel Alliance had launched some daring raids on Kessel to rescue some POWs. And in a separate incident, the notorious Tiber Zahn staged a prisoner revolt and escaped with one of his allies. To tighten this up, the Imps put several enormous satellites in orbit to better connect the individual camps to the protecting fleets, which included at least one Victory class, 2 Acclamators, and 2 Tartan-class patrol cruisers, along with dozens each of TIE fighters, interceptors, and bombers, and even a squad of TIE defenders. Zahn was actually crazy enough to come back with some of his consortium and take these forces on, with some accounts saying that he defeated all of the Imperial forces. When Admiral Akbar was captured by Boba Fett, he was on his way to what was likely a death sentence working the mines of Kessel. But luckily, the Star Destroyer that was transporting him was raided by Renegade Squadron, though Wedge Antilles was actually imprisoned on Kessel, and was even scheduled for execution, getting as close as being packed onto the train that was taking him to the death camp, when Luke and Rogue Squadron were able to show up and save the day, freeing Antilles and rolling this victory into freeing the majority of the prisoners on Kessel. At this point in its history, the Imps had installed several atmosphere generators, but when word of the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Endor, the commanders decided to shut these systems off, and simply work the prisoners remaining to death in this thinning atmosphere. But after liberating Kashyyyk, Solo, Lando, and Chewie, along with a contingent of Wookiee soldiers, all headed to the rescue. They were able to get the atmosphere back pumping, and eventually saved all of the prisoners. A civil war would break out amongst the Imperials, involving Hyssa, Trioculus, and Morith Dul. They all ended up torturing and betraying each other trying to hold on to power, and they would keep it out of New Republic hands up until 13 ABY. Here, Nin Nub would be put in charge of the spice capital of the galaxy. He was put in place by Lando Calrissian, who, with the Imperials taken care of and the New Republic unsure what to do with it, the lifetime hustler was able to legally purchase these mines. And this is the point you can start making your conspiracy videos on how Han and Lando teamed up to finesse all of the crime bosses and even the Emperor out of the sole spice-producing planet in the galaxy, leading a whole rebellion just to become legal, monopolistic spice lords. Luke's wife, Mara Jade, helped with the general operation of Calrissian's various business ventures, but it was Nien Nunb who came up with the idea of using blind, sentient species like the craniopods to work the mines. No longer slaves, they were paid a good wage, as the medicinal and safe recreational use of spice was such a profitable business that Lando and Nub were swimming in credits, turning what was once a place synonymous with hell, where slaves were worked to death, into a career that a lot of people actually sought out, with greatly increased quality of living on site, and even the craniopods setting up thriving communities. But to bring this story full circle, when Leia and Han were helping to map out some of the uncharted tunnels, they discovered a fissure in the rock caused by a quake. This new opening led to a city-sized area, containing new life forms like fungi, centipedes, and different forms of spiders, along with a sort of miniature hawkbat. Much more biodiversity than you see elsewhere on Kessel, like some sort of hollow Kessel Earth. There was a whole world under the surface. This is when Leia was able to sense that those bogies flying about were actually transferring information into a different realm, and she was the one that connected the dots on the ancient machinery, seeing that it must all somehow have been crafted by and serving some purpose to the Celestials. After this, we don't hear a lot from Kessel, except for when the Yuuzhan Vong invaded. It was one of the many places that they captured. That's it for its history and breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. Order 66 survivors hid out there in one of the abandoned mines, and tried to lure Darth Vader into a trap. It didn't work. No Jedi escaped. And there's a detail that's kind of confusing, but there was a Republic-run prison/mining operation on Kessel before the Empire, Cassar Forge was a teacher in this program and helped convicts to learn how to re-enter society upon release. He would also end up being the father of 2 Rogue Squadron pilots, Lujane and Inriri. Its moon, named Garrison Moon, was destroyed by a prototype Death Star laser, which was concealed in the maw which enveloped Kessel. This moon was also known as the Sky Bogey by miners, a sort of larger version of the small bogies that floated around Kessel. In the original script, the word was written as Kissel, Kissel, and in the work The Second Kessel Run, Kessel was depicted as being a lush, giant, fungy forest planet. But when making the Essential Atlas, this was retconned into being Little Kessel, a world near the Kessel Run. But the new Essential chronology still had Kessel looking like a greenish-blue spherical world, and that's how it's shown in Star Wars Galaxy Jump to Lightspeed and Battlefront Renegade Squadron. And so that's probably why it looks different in canon. A lot of additional information comes from these sources. If you want to pick them up, or the real-world books that lay out some of the theories on hallucinogen connections to different realms, the stuff that seems to have inspired the Star Wars lore on this, all that's linked down below. If you want to connect with us on social media, find ways that you can help support this channel for free, or check out our Patreon and PayPal, be sure to check out the links in the description. Special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, especially our $25 tier Andrew Bann, Black Phoenix, Feed Me Kittens, and Seraph Diaz. But most important of all, remember, the Emperor was kind of a failure. The real masterminds were Lando and Ninnub, and the Force will be with you, always.